I'm 72 years old, and until last night, I thought my family still respected me, even at little. I spent decades raising my son, supporting him through failures, illnesses, heartbreaks, sometimes giving him money I couldn't afford. I thought loyalty meant something. But last night, when my granddaughter Lily looked at me with cold, dismissive eyes and said I couldn't sit with them because Mom said you're an old burden, my heart cracked open. And when the entire table, my daughter-in-law, my son, even the child I once rocked to sleep, laughed at me, I felt something inside me finally break. I stood up, walked out, and no one stopped me. No one cared. Hours later, my son texted only 4 words. Payment still due tomorrow? Not an apology, not concerned, just greed. I stared at the screen and typed back, "Figure it out." He had no idea what those words truly meant, or how the next morning would turn his entire world upside down.
My name is Martha Eldridge. I'm 72 years old, and as I stepped into my son's house that evening, I carried a small box of homemade cookies and a heart full of hope. I looked forward to these rare family dinners, believing that despite the distance that had quietly grown between us, I still mattered. But the moment I entered, Amara barely looked up from her phone, Jonah nodded without warmth, and Lily glanced at me with an odd mixture of confusion and annoyance. The atmosphere felt thick, cold, and strangely rehearsed, and though I tried to brush it off, a sinking feeling whispered in my chest that something was terribly wrong. I hadn't even pulled my chair out when Lily, sweet little Lily, whom I once rocked to sleep, stared straight at me with a dismissive smirk far too adult for her age. "You can't sit with us," she said loudly, repeating every syllable confidently. "Mom said you're an old burden." Her voice echoed in the dining room like a slap. For a moment I thought she was joking, mimicking something she heard on television, but when she rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, I realized it was deliberate, taught behavior, absorbed from the adults she trusted. My stomach twisted as the words settled heavily inside me. Before I could respond, a chorus of laughter erupted around the table. Amara laughed first, sharp, proud, unbothered, while Jonah threw his head back as though it were the funniest comment of the night. Even Lily giggled, encouraged by the cruelty surrounding her. I stood frozen, my fingers tightening around the back of the chair, wondering how the family I raised had become this unrecognizable. Jonah didn't look embarrassed or ashamed. He simply waved his hand dismissively as if I were being dramatic for reacting at all. At that moment, I felt like a stranger in a home I once helped pay for. I swallowed the burning lump in my throat, refusing to let them see me break. Without a word, I set the cookie box on the counter. No one even noticed, and slowly turned toward the door. The laughter continued behind me, muffled but relentless, as though my exit was just another joke. Every step felt heavier than the last, and when I reached the outside air, the cool night wind stung my eyes more than the humiliation. I walked to my car with trembling hands, quietly closing the door, refusing to let myself cry. Not yet. Not for them. I hadn't even set my purse down at home when my phone buzzed. For one foolish second, I hoped it was an apology, but no. It was Jonah. "Payment still due tomorrow?" 4 casual words. Not a hint about whether I got home safely. Not a hint of remorse, just entitlement, just expectation. The very thing he had learned I would always give, support. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling something inside me twist into something unrecognizable. Something stronger. The audacity stunned me, but more than that, it woke a part of me that had been silent for years. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the anger, pain, and exhaustion mixing into a quiet, dangerous calm. For decades, I had overlooked their selfishness, their distance, their dismissive tones. But tonight's humiliation combined with Jonah's shameless message snapped something inside me clean in half. I typed 2 words. Figure it out. No explanation, no apology, no grandmotherly softness. When I hit send, the heaviness in my chest lifted just a bit. It was the first time I'd ever denied him anything, and the power of that tiny act surged through me like electricity. That night sleep refused to come. I lay in bed replaying every sacrifice I'd made over the years, the late-night babysitting, the money Jonah begged for, the rent I covered when his business struggled, the holidays where I cooked alone while they arrived hours late. Every memory now felt tainted by the realization that they never valued me, only my usefulness. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, feeling something shift inside me, something resolute, something ready. If they saw me as a burden, then it was time they learned exactly how much they depended on the woman they mocked. Martha sat at her small wooden desk the next morning, opening the locked drawer.
She hadn't touched in months. Inside were neatly arranged folders, property deeds, rental agreements, investment summaries, proof of the life she had quietly built after her husband passed away. 3 rental houses fully paid off, a valuable piece of unused land her late husband bought decades earlier, and a comfortable savings account Jonah never knew existed. She had lived frugally, letting her family believe she had nothing because she never wanted them to feel pressured to earn her help. But now, looking through the documents, she felt a strange mix of pride and anger. They laughed at her as if she were helpless, when in reality, she held more financial stability than all of them combined. As she sifted through the papers, Martha found the envelope with her current will, updated after her husband's death. She remembered how carefully she wrote it, hoping Jonah would one day appreciate the future she was securing for him. She had even added Lily's name in hopes that love would grow where distance existed. But now, reading through the calm, generous words, she felt a hollow ache. They never cared to ask how she was managing on her own, never offered support, never checked on her health or needs. She realized the will had been written for a family that no longer existed, the version she wished for, not the one that mocked her the night before. And for the first time, she considered changing everything. By late morning, Martha had made up her mind. She drove to the bank, her pulse steady with determination. The young banker, polite and efficient, walked her through the process of tightening her accounts, adding extra security questions, removing Jonah's emergency access privilege he never appreciated, and shifting a portion of her savings into a protected fund. As she signed the forms, she felt layers of dependency peeling away. For years, she quietly transferred monthly support to Jonah, cushioning his reckless spending. Now, with each signature, she reclaimed a part of herself she hadn't realized she'd been giving away. When she left the bank, a crisp breeze brushed her face, and for the first time in decades, she felt untouchable. Back home, Martha opened her laptop and clicked through her online banking. One final tab glared at her, the automatic payment she'd been sending Jonah every month like clockwork. Rent for his failing business, money he rarely thanked her for, money he assumed he deserved. With a deep breath, she clicked cancel. The confirmation message popped up, simple and emotionless. Payment terminated. A small triumphant smile tugged at her lips. She imagined Jonah waking up, checking his account, expecting her lifeline as usual. But this time, he would get nothing. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was simply the moment she stopped allowing them to drain her. That afternoon, Martha met with Roland Pierce, a calm, meticulous attorney who had handled her affairs for years. He listened as she recounted the dinner, the humiliation, the message Jonah sent afterward. His jaw tightened slightly, but he remained professional. "You're doing the right thing, Martha," he said gently. Together, they discussed updating the will, protecting her properties, and creating legal distance from her son's financial chaos. Roland reminded her that she owed no explanation to those who disrespected her. When she left his office, she felt lighter, as though she were slowly building a shield around herself, one her family could no longer penetrate or exploit. Back home again, Martha opened a large accordion folder filled with years of receipts, bank slips, and handwritten notes, proof of every time Jonah had turned to her for help. The unpaid bills she covered, the loans she forgave, the rent she paid for his business when it was failing. As she sorted the papers, she felt a mixture of sorrow and clarity. These weren't gifts freely given. They were lifelines Jonah had mistaken for permanent obligations. She placed the most important documents into a neat labeled stack, evidence of who had truly carried whom. For the first time, she realized she had been the backbone of the family, not the burden. At dawn the next morning, her phone buzzed relentlessly. Jonah's name flashed across the screen again and again, each call a more frantic than the last. She let them ring out. No explanations, no reassurances. When he finally switched to texting, the messages poured in, questions turning into irritation, irritation turning into anxiety. His usual confidence seemed to evaporate as he realized something was wrong with his accounts. Martha placed the phone face down on the table, her hands steady. She has spent a lifetime jumping every time her son needed her. But now, as the sun rose outside her window, Jonah felt the first taste of panic, and Martha felt the first taste of freedom. At barely 7 in the morning, loud, frantic knocking jolted Martha from her quiet breakfast. She opened the door to find Jonah standing there, face flushed, hair uncombed, eyes wild with anger and fear. He didn't greet her or ask to come in. He shoved forward, demanding, "What's going on with the payment? Why didn't it come through?" His voice was loud enough to draw the neighbors' attention. He wasn't there because he cared about last night or because he regretted his behavior. He was there because he needed her money. The realization stung, but it also strengthened her resolve. Jonah wasn't visiting his mother. He was cornering his ATM. Instead of shrinking back, Martha stepped between Jonah and the doorway, refusing to let him enter. Her voice remained calm, almost gentle, but firm enough to strike him harder than shouting ever could. "I owe you nothing, Jonah," she said plainly. His eyes widened, unprepared for those words. She repeated them slowly, clearly, each syllable landing like a stone. Jonah tried to argue, insisting she was overreacting and that he needed help just this once, as if years of dependence didn't count. But Martha saw the truth. He wasn't shocked because she refused. He was shocked because she finally stopped enabling him. And that terrified him far more than losing the money. Minutes later, Amara marched up the driveway, heels clicking aggressively on the pavement, holding Lily's hand with more force than affection. Without waiting for a greeting, she launched into accusations. Martha was being selfish, dramatic, ungrateful for all they did for her. She conveniently forgot the laughter from the night before. Amara's voice rose to a shrill pitch as she demanded Martha resume the payments, insisting Jonah's business couldn't suffer because of an old woman's hurt feelings. The irony didn't escape Martha. She watched Amara rant, realizing her daughter-in-law saw her not as family, but as a financial strategy. And for the first time, Martha didn't shrink beneath Amara's words. She saw straight through them. As her parents argued, Lily stood quietly at the edge of the porch, gripping the railing with small, trembling fingers. The confidence she had displayed the night before, the mocking tone, the rolled eyes, was gone. Instead, she looked frightened, confused, torn between the version of her grandmother her parents portrayed and the woman standing calmly before them now. When Amara shouted, Lily flinched. When Jonah raised his voice, she backed away. For the first time, the child seemed to recognize that something was wrong, not with Martha, but with the chaos her parents created. Martha's heart softened, but she didn't step forward. This was a lesson Lily needed to witness, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. Desperate for answers, Jonah stepped aside and called the bank right in front of her, pacing back and forth like a man sinking in quicksand. Martha listened as his voice shifted from confident to confused to panicked. "What do you mean the account is restricted? What do you mean I don't have access anymore?" he barked into the phone. His face drained of color as the reality set in. Martha had cut every financial tie he relied on. Amara watched him, horrified, realizing they had pushed too far. When Jonah hung up, he stared at Martha as if seeing her for the first time, not as a burden, but as the one person who held all the power. The truth hit Jonah harder than any argument. His voice softened, trembling slightly as he admitted, "Without the monthly payment, I can't cover my business rent. I have bills due, customers expecting orders, employees needing wages, and I had gambled everything on the assumption that his mother's money would always be there." He tried to mask it with excuses, blaming the economy, blaming stress, even blaming Martha for choosing the wrong time to stop helping. But beneath all that noise, Martha heard the truth. He had never learned to stand on his own because she had always carried him. And now, without her, he didn't know how to survive. After listening to every excuse, every accusation, every desperate plea, Martha realized there was nothing more to say. Jonah and Amara had never apologized, only demanded, expecting her to fix the mess they created. With a deep breath, she stepped back inside. "I hope you figure things out," she said quietly, not with anger, but with finality. Jonah reached out, but she gently moved his hand away. Then, slowly and deliberately, she closed the door. The sound echoed through the hallway like a declaration of independence. For the first time in her life, Martha chose herself, and it felt like freedom. 2 days after Martha cut the payments, Jonah arrived at his shop to find a bright orange envelope taped to the door. Eviction notice. His stomach dropped as he tore it open, reading the blunt declaration that he had 7 days to clear out or face legal action. His employees watched him anxiously, whispering amongst themselves as he tried to act unfazed, but the tremor in his hands gave him away. He knew his landlord wouldn't negotiate. He had already been given too many extensions. Without Martha's monthly safety net, he had no backup plan, no emergency savings, nothing. The business he bragged about for years was collapsing, and for the first time, Jonah realized just how much he had depended on the mother he mocked. When Amara returned to her parents' home seeking emotional support, expecting sympathy, she instead found judgment. Her mother crossed her arms, shaking her head, while her father raised his voice for the first time in years, calling her behavior toward Martha shameful and short-sighted. They reminded her of every warning they had given, how she treated Jonah's mother too coldly, how she fueled disrespect in Lily, how she pushed Jonah into entitlement. Instead of comfort, Amara faced a mirror reflecting everything she refused to acknowledge. Her own family accused her of poisoning Jonah against the one person who had always supported him. For the first time, Amara felt the sting of isolation, realizing she had played a major role in their downfall. That afternoon, Martha's phone rang unexpectedly. Lily's teacher spoke gently, explaining that Lily had broken down in class, crying uncontrollably after hearing other children mention their grandparents. She kept repeating, "I don't want my grandma to hate me." Martha felt her chest tighten. She listened quietly as the teacher described Lily's confusion, torn between loyalty to her parents and the grandmother she instinctively loved. Martha agreed to pick Lily up early, and when she arrived, Lily ran into her arms, sobbing apologies she barely understood. Martha held her tightly, realizing that the cycle of cruelty could end with the child if someone stepped up to guide her with patience instead of spite. Lily wasn't the enemy. She was collateral damage. While Martha focused on Lily's emotional needs, Roland Pierce, her attorney, was busy finalizing the legal boundaries she requested. That evening, a certified letter arrived at Jonah and Amara's home. The envelope contained a formal notice stating that all financial support, emergency privileges, and inherited considerations were terminated indefinitely. Jonah read the letter 3 times, each sentence tightening around him like a rope. Amara snatched it from his hands, furious, calling Martha vindictive, but Jonah knew better. The attorney's tone was clear. Martha had protected herself, and there was nothing they could do to reverse it. The safety net they relied on so blindly had been cut clean and legally sealed. The next morning, Jonah showed up again, this time alone, shoulders slumped, voice softer, almost rehearsed. He claimed he wanted to apologize, saying the dinner was a miscommunication and that things got blown out of proportion. But there was no real remorse in his eyes, only desperation. Every apology circled back to money, to
business, to how Martha's withdrawal had ruined everything. He never acknowledged the humiliation he allowed at the dinner table, or the years of taking her for granted. Martha listened calmly, but could see straight through him. This wasn't an apology, it was a negotiation attempt, and she was no longer negotiating. For years, Martha had endured their disrespect at their table, but now she decided it was time to reclaim her dignity. She invited Jonah, Amara, and Lily over for dinner, something she hadn't done in a long time. They arrived tense, expecting confrontation or begging, but instead found a neatly set table, warm lighting, and Martha standing tall and composed. She didn't raise her voice or guilt them. She simply controlled the room with calm authority. For once, they sat quietly as she served food, unsure of what to expect. Gone was the woman they mocked. In her place was someone who had rediscovered her strength, and they felt it. When dinner was finished, Martha placed a stack of documents on the table, receipts of every rent payment she made, every loan she forgave, every bill she covered for Jonah's business. She laid out property deeds, investment statements, and proof of her financial independence. Jonah's jaw dropped. Amara stared in disbelief. They realized they hadn't been supporting an old burden. They had been draining a woman far stronger and wealthier than they ever imagined. Martha ended with a quiet, steady statement. "You mocked the person who kept this family standing." Her words landed like thunder, and for the first time, they understood the magnitude of what they had thrown away.
Before I reveal what happened next, take a moment and hit subscribe, because the truth that's about to unfold will change the way you see this entire family.
The next morning, I awoke before sunrise, the house still cold and quiet. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of their reactions. I sat with a cup of tea, listening to the stillness, knowing they were about to face the consequences of years of disrespect they thought I'd tolerate forever. My phone buzzed nonstop downstairs. Messages, missed calls, panicked attempts to reach me. They must have realized by now that without my signature, without my financial approval, everything they depended on had frozen overnight. I didn't rush. I didn't react. I simply waited, letting the weight of their choices crash into them like a tidal wave they created themselves. And for once, the silence felt empowering. By 8 a.m., the peace shattered. My granddaughter's screech echoed from the living room, followed by my daughter-in-law's frantic yelling. Papers rustled, drawers slammed, footsteps thudded across the floor as if the entire house had been struck by disaster. They weren't worried about me. They were terrified about themselves. My son barged into my room without knocking, face pale. "Mom, the payment didn't go through. The bank says the authorization was withdrawn. Did you do something?" He spoke like a man who'd suddenly realized how fragile his stability actually was. I looked at him the same way he looked at me yesterday, with the calmness of someone who no longer owed them anything. "I told you," I said softly, "figure it out." My granddaughter, the same child who called me a burden with an eye roll, stood trembling behind her father. Her confidence was gone, replaced by guilt she didn't know how to express. "Great-grandma? Please. Dad says we might have to move," she whispered, voice tiny, eyes watery. For a moment, I saw the innocence beneath the cruelty she had repeated from others. Children imitate what they hear. I leaned down, met her eyes, and spoke gently, not forgiving, but teaching. Words have weight. Yesterday, you hurt me. Today, you're feeling your own version of pain. That's how life teaches us. She cried harder, clutching my hand, and for the first time I didn't pull away. But I didn't promise anything either. My daughter-in-law entered next, makeup smudged, voice trembling, ego shattered. Please, talk to the bank. They froze the funds. The renovation team is waiting. The school fees are due." Her voice cracked under the pressure she had spent years pretending she could handle without me. She avoided eye contact, unable to face the cruelty she'd allowed at her dinner table. "You made my granddaughter disrespect me," I reminded her quietly. "You laughed at your own child's humiliation of the family." She dropped to her knees, sobbing, whispering apologies she never believed she'd have to say. But honesty replaces arrogance quickly when the ground beneath someone disappears. I didn't respond immediately. I wanted her to sit with the truth she had spent years ignoring. My son tried to hold himself together, but guilt was written across every line of his face. "Mom, I messed up," he admitted, voice raw. "I shouldn't have laughed. I shouldn't have let them talk to you that way. I should have stood up for you." He sat beside me slowly as if approaching a wound he had caused. "It wasn't about the money," I said. "It was about respect. You forgot who stood by you when you had nothing." He lowered his head into his hands. "I know, and I'm asking you, not as your son, but as a man who's failed, please let me fix this." For the first time, his apology felt real. And maybe that mattered more than anything. I stood, finally ready to speak with all of them gathered in the hallway, anxious and silent. "You want my support?" I began calmly. "Then things change. Starting now." Their eyes widened. I continued, "Respect is not optional. I will never sit at a table where I'm mocked again. I will never be treated like a burden by the family I built. And if I help you, it will be on my terms, with my dignity intact." No one argued. No one even breathed too loudly. They simply nodded, humbled. For the first time, I wasn't begging to belong. They were asking permission to stay in my life. And in that shift, I found the power they thought I never had. Later that morning, the tension in the house softened, replaced by a fragile understanding. My son made breakfast and set a plate in front of me quietly, not out of obligation, but sincerity. My granddaughter sat beside me, drawing a picture of us together, her earlier cruelty replaced by a child's simple desire to be loved. My daughter-in-law cleaned the table without a word, humbled into silence, but trying. I didn't restore the funds immediately. Some lessons need time to stay permanent. But I allowed something else to return, a chance for them to do better. And as sunlight filled the room, I realized I wasn't nobody. I wasn't a burden. I was the pillar they forgot they depended on, and the one who finally reminded them.